My husband asked for a divorce. He said, "I want the house, the cars, everything, just not our son." My lawyer begged me to fight back. I said, "Give him everything." Everyone thought I had lost my mind. At the final hearing, I signed everything away. He didn't know that I had already won. He smiled until his lawyer's face went pale. Before I tell you how I legally destroyed him without lifting a finger, write in the comments which city you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I read every single comment. The sunlight in Munich normally feels like a promise, but that Tuesday morning it felt like a spotlight in an interrogation room. We sat at the kitchen island, Calacatta gold marble, imported from Italy. I remember choosing this slab 3 years ago. I remember negotiating with a supplier, tracking the shipping container, and personally supervising the installation to make sure the grain pattern was perfectly aligned. Now it was just the surface where my marriage was being liquidated. Konstantin didn't look at me. He scrolled through his tablet, treating the end of our 14-year relationship like an unimportant scheduling conflict. He took a sip of his espresso, made in the machine I gave him for our anniversary, and finally set the device aside. He didn't look sad. He was impatient. "This isn't working anymore, Katerina," he said. His tone was professional, the same voice he used when firing a contractor who missed a deadline. "I've outgrown this. I need a partner who fits where I'm going, not where I've been." I didn't blink. I didn't reach for a tissue. I just watched his hands. They were manicured steady. He wasn't nervous because he didn't see me as a threat. To him, I was just part of the back-end infrastructure. Essential for operations but invisible to the public. Infrastructure doesn't fight back. Just gets replaced. "Here's how this will go," he continued, sliding a single sheet of paper across the cold stone. "I keep the company. Keep the brand. Keep the house. You get Leonard. I'll give you a one-time cash settlement of 50,000 euros to set yourself up somewhere. Consider it generous, especially since you haven't brought in any new clients for 6 months." I looked at the paper. It was a bullet point summary. He had listed our entire life in bullet points. The estate on Lake Starnberg, worth 1.2 million euros, stays with husband. Lux Design Group, stays with husband. Range Rover 2024 model, stays with husband. Leonard, 16 years old, custody to wife. He was disposing of me. He was erasing 14 years of my work. The late nights I'd balanced the books, the creative direction that won him Designer of the Year, the quiet management of his ego, and he was offering me 50,000 euros like it was severance pay. Any other woman might have screamed. She might have thrown the espresso in his face or begged him to remember the vows we made. But I wasn't just a wife anymore. In that moment, the emotional part of my brain shut off and the chief financial officer part woke up. I looked at the marble. I looked at the bullet point paper. And I saw something Konstantin didn't see. He wasn't asking for assets. He was demanding a bomb. He wanted the empire. Fame. He could have it. He could have the prestige, the address, the image. He didn't know what lay beneath the foundation. I knew about the cracks in the load-bearing walls that he was too arrogant to inspect. I folded my hands on the table. My pulse quickened, not even once. It was clinical. "Okay," I said. Konstantin blinked. He leaned back, frowned slightly, and waited for the scene. He wanted the tears. He wanted confirmation of my desperation to prove how valuable he was. "Okay," he repeated. "You want the house and the business. You want a clean break. I agree." I stood up and smoothed the front of my blouse. "Draw up the papers, Konstantin. I'll sign whatever you want." I left the kitchen before he could see the hint of a smile on my lips. He thought he was firing me. He had no idea I was letting him sign his own death sentence. Most people look at a woman in my position, 14 years deep, quiet, standing in the shadow of a loud man, and they see a victim. They see someone weak. They ask the question that always haunts women like me. Why didn't you leave sooner? They assume I stayed because of love or fear, or that pathetic hope that one day he'd wake up and finally appreciate me. They're wrong. I didn't stay because I was weak. I stayed because I calculated. In the first decade, I was the invisible engine of Lux Design Group. Constantine was the face, charming, handsome, brilliant at shaking hands and drinking whiskey with clients. But I was the one who turned his sketches into blueprints. I was the one who negotiated with contractors trying to rip us off. I was the financial director, the creative director, and the crisis manager. All for a salary of €0 per year. My payment was supposed to be our shared future, but 3 years ago I realized that future was a lie. I discovered the rot at the center of the company, and that's when the dynamic shifted. There's a concept in psychology called the sunk cost fallacy. The invisible chain of survival. It's the trap that binds you to a failing investment because you've already put so much of your life into it. You tell yourself you can fix it with just one more year, one more massive effort. You think you can save the ship. Felt that chain. It was heavy. It wrapped around my neck every time Constantine belittled me publicly or took credit for my work. It whispered that leaving would mean admitting I'd wasted a decade of my life. But then the analytical part of my brain took over. I realized I wasn't fighting for a marriage anymore. I was managing a liability. If I'd left 3 years ago when I first found the cracks in the foundation, I would have been crushed by the rubble. My name was still on the loans. My credit was still tied to his. If I'd left then, his collapse would have been my collapse. So I didn't leave. I stayed. I treated the marriage like a hostile work environment I couldn't quit yet. I stopped investing emotions and started investing in an exit strategy. I became a structural engineer in a building marked for demolition. My goal wasn't to save the building. It was to hold on long enough to get the civilians out. The civilian was my son, Leonard. For 3 years I played the role. I nodded when Constantine bragged. I smiled when he bought things we couldn't afford. But in the background I methodically untangled myself. I had my name removed from the new business credit lines. I refused to co-sign the house refinancing, claiming I wanted to protect his creditworthiness from my student loans. I transferred my inheritance into a trust he couldn't touch. I didn't. Silence. I reduced my portfolio risk. So when he sat me down at that marble table and fired me from my own life, he thought he was disposing of a broken woman. He didn't realize he was giving me the one thing I'd been working toward for 36 months. He gave me the emergency exit, and he volunteered to stay alone in the burning building. The speed of my replacement wasn't just efficient. It was corporate. Constantine didn't wait for the ink to dry on the bullet point paper. He moved Amelie in 48 hours after our kitchen table conversation. She was 24, an intern I'd hired 6 months ago because I thought she had an eye for color. Turns out her primary talent was ambition. They announced the rebrand on Instagram before I'd even packed my first box. An elegant black and white post. Lux Design Group. Evolution. I scrolled through the website on my phone. My bio was gone. My name was erased from the founding documents. The awards page that listed the 3 industry prizes I personally won now listed them as agency achievements. And there, under the heading Creative Team, was Amelie. Her title reads, Head of Vision. She was wearing my vintage Chanel blazer in her profile picture. It was a public execution of my career. They weren't just taking over the company. They were stealing the recognition. Constantine rewrote the history to make it look like I never existed, as if the last decade's success was exclusively his manifested genius. But the digital erasure was nothing compared to what they did to the house. The conservatory was my refuge. It was the only room in that glass and steel mausoleum that felt human. I'd restored it with my own hands, sourced vintage terracotta tiles from a salvage company in Tuscany, brought fiddle leaf figs in the corners back to life. It was where I drank my coffee. It was where I breathed. I came home on a Thursday to pack the last of my books and heard the sledgehammers. Dust drifted into the hallway. I walked to the back of the house. Amelie stood in the doorway, holding up her phone, filming a story for her followers. Demo day, she chirped, panning the camera over the destruction. Finally getting rid of this dark, outdated energy. We're transforming this into a white content gym. Yoga mats, mirrors and ring lights, baby. Minimalism is the new luxury. Dark and outdated. She was smashing rare Italian craftsmanship with a sledgehammer to make room for a ring light. I watched as a worker threw a piece of terracotta into a dumpster. Shattered. That tile had survived 200 years in an Italian villa only to die because a 24-year-old influencer needed better lighting for her glute workout. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't beg them to stop. I simply calculated the value of the renovation costs being added to the already maxed-out credit cards. Keep digging, Constantine, I thought. Make it expensive. Oh, Katerina, Amelie said, lowering her phone. She didn't look embarrassed. She looked triumphant. Sorry about the noise. We just really wanted a fresh start. You know how it is. Out with the old. That's going to look very expensive, I said calmly. That's the point, she smiled. Then the doorbell rang. It was the final insult. Ingeborg, my mother-in-law, had arrived to supervise. She walked in, wrinkled her nose at the dust, and immediately started directing the furniture movers. Constantine hadn't hired a professional moving company. He'd hired 2 men with a van and a stack of cheap, flimsy cardboard boxes. Ingeborg stood over me while I folded my clothes. You really let yourself go, didn't you? She said, gesturing vaguely toward my lack of makeup. Constantine needs someone with energy, someone who represents the brand. You stopped trying, Katerina. You got comfortable. Comfortable. I'd kept her son out of prison for 3 years, juggling creditors and tax audits, and she thought I'd gotten comfortable. You should have fought for him, she added, sniffing dismissively as she pushed a box of my shoes toward the door. A real woman keeps her husband's interest. You let him drift. This is the consequence of your apathy. I sealed the box. The sound was loud, a sharp rip that cut through her sermon. You're right, Ingeborg, I said in a flat voice. I should have paid more attention to many things, like the fact that your son is a fraud. Make sure you take everything, she snapped, checking her watch. Amelie wants the closet cleared by noon. We don't want any dead weight. I looked at her. I looked at Amelie posing in the ruins of my conservatory. I looked at Constantine in his glass office on the phone, laughing loudly, playing the role of Titan. Dead weight. I picked up the last box. It was heavy, filled with the financial records I'd printed 3 years ago. Evidence. Don't worry, I said, walking to the door. I'm leaving you exactly what you deserve. 3 years ago I became an insomniac. Not because of stress but because of a discovery. It was 3 a.m. on a Tuesday. Constantine was working late again, which, as I later learned, meant drinking whiskey with potential investors he never closed. I was in my home office reconciling the quarterly accounts for Lux Design Group. The numbers didn't add up. There was a discrepancy in the supplier payments. Money was flowing to vendors we hadn't used in months. I pulled the raw bank data and then I saw it. It started as a trick. A few thousand here for consulting fees, a few thousand there for marketing expenses. But when I checked the tax numbers, the companies didn't exist. The money was diverted to personal accounts. Constantine's personal accounts. I dug deeper. I pulled the credit reports. I pulled the tax returns. What I found was a financial crime scene. The company wasn't just struggling. It was insolvent. Constantine had taken high-interest merchant cash advances, predatory loans with daily repayment schedules, just to cover payroll. He'd maxed out every credit line. The house, which I thought we had 50% equity in, was mortgaged to the hilt with a second and third mortgage I'd never signed. He'd forged my signature. But the fatal shot was the letter from the tax office. It was buried in a digital folder labeled Old Projects. Notice of intent to levy. He hadn't paid payroll taxes for 6 quarters. He'd been using employees with holdings to fund his lifestyle. The Range Rover lease, the dinners, the image. This wasn't just debt. This was a crime. The total liability was 2.3 million euros. I sat there in the dark. The blue light from the monitor illuminated the ruins of my life. My first instinct was to wake him up and scream, demand answers, fix it. But then I looked at the numbers again. If I confronted him now, he'd deny it. He'd gaslight me. He'd say I didn't understand high-level finance. And worse, if we divorced now, half of those debts would be mine. Baden-Württemberg is a community property state. His fraud was my fraud. His ruin was my ruin. So I made a decision. I didn't scream. I created a spreadsheet. I named the file the exit. For the next 36 months, I lived a double life. By day, I was the supportive wife nodding along to his grandiose fantasies. By night, I was a forensic accountant dismantling my own exposure. I stopped mixing funds. I opened a separate savings account at a bank he didn't use. I deposited every cent of my inheritance from my grandmother, 300,000 euros, directly into it. I quietly sold the crypto portfolio I'd bought years ago that had grown to another 300,000 euros and transferred that too. I built a firewall of cash, 625,000 euros that was legally provable separate property. And I let him dig. Every time he wanted to sign a new loan, I found a way to be unavailable to co-sign, forcing him to take it out solely in his name. Every time he wanted to expand, I encouraged him to be the sole visionary, fed his ego so he'd remove my name from the documents. I watched him drown and I didn't throw him a rope. Built a raft. Back in the present, I sat in the conference room of Nina's law office. The polished mahogany table was covered with my evidence. 3 binders color-coded. Binder 1, the debts. Binder 2, the fraud. Binder 3, the bomb. Nina Castellano, my lawyer, was a woman who rarely smiled and billed heavily. She flipped through binder 3. Her eyes widened. She looked at me, then back at the page, then at me again. "You have the notice from the tax office," she said. It wasn't a question. "I do. And he doesn't know you have it. He doesn't know I can read a profit and loss statement, let alone a tax levy notice." Nina closed the binder. She took off her glasses. "Katerina, if we litigate this normally, the court will split the assets and the debts. You could still be held liable for part of it, especially the marital debts." "I don't want to litigate normally," I said. I slid a single document across the table. It was a draft divorce settlement. I give him everything. The house, the company, the cars, the furniture, the brand. I keep my separate property, my inheritance, and my son. And in exchange for my generosity in waiving my rights to the firm, I pointed to paragraph 4. He signs a sole acceptance of liabilities clause. He releases me from all business and marital debts, known and unknown. Nina laughed. She looked at the total debt in the binder. 2.3 million euros. Then she looked at the settlement offer. Assets worth maybe 1.5 million euros on paper, but in reality effectively zero. "You're giving him a gift worth negative 1 million, she whispered. "He thinks he's winning the lottery," I said. "He thinks he's getting the empire for free." Nina leaned back. A slow, terrifying grin spreads across her face. "He'll sign," she said. "His ego won't let him check the bill." "Exactly," I replied. "He's not a businessman, Nina. He's a narcissist. And narcissists never look at the price tag until the bill comes due." The mediation took place in a glass conference room on the 42nd floor. The view was panoramic. The lake, the city, the expanse of the life we'd built. It was designed to make you feel powerful. Constantine arrived 10 minutes late. He wasn't wearing a suit of mourning for our marriage. He was wearing a victory lap. Navy tailored suit, silk tie, and on his wrist a brand new watch. A Royal Oak offshore. Retail price. 45,000 euros. I knew exactly how he paid for it. He didn't. He'd put it on the company Amex 2 days ago. I saw the alert on my phone before I turned off notifications forever. He sat down, threw his phone on the table, and didn't look at me. He looked at his lawyer. "Samuel, A man in his 60s with white hair and the tired expression of someone who spends too much time managing adult toddlers. "Let's get this over with," Konstantin said, glancing at the stolen watch. "I have a site visit at 2 p.m. Nina slides the divorce agreement across the table. It was thick. The asset transfer section was on top. The liabilities list was buried in the back, only referenced as attachment C. "The terms are as discussed," Nina said in a dry voice. "Katerina waives all claims to Lux Design Group and the marital residence. She retains custody of Leonard and a one-time payment of 50,000 euros for relocation costs." Konstantin laughed. It was a short, sharp sound. 50,000. That's it. You're walking away from a €1,000,000 brand for 50,000. He looked at me then, shaking his head with fake pity. "You always settled for less, Katerina. No vision." I didn't respond. I watched him through a specific lens. A psychological concept called the illusion of power in an empty wallet. You see, narcissists like Konstantin confuse spending power with ownership power. For him, the ability to swipe a card means he's wealthy. He believes that if he sits in the CEO chair, wears the watch and drives the car, the actual account balance doesn't matter. He thinks his status is an intrinsic quality of his soul, not a borrowed facade. He believes he's the sun and debt is just gravity trying to hold him down. He looked at the papers and saw only the assets. He saw the word house and thought mine. He saw company and thought king. He didn't see the invisible chains attached to them because he believes he's too important to fail. Samuel, however, wasn't delusional. He picked up the agreement and started reading. He frowned. He flipped to the back. He paused. "Konstantin," Samuel said in a quiet voice. "We need to pause. You're taking over the entire company. That means you're assuming the entire balance sheet. I haven't seen a current audit. We need to do a due diligence review of the liabilities before you sign this." My heart pounded against my ribs. This was the moment. If Samuel dug, if he pulled a current credit report, the game was over. "We don't have time for an audit," Konstantin snapped. "That takes weeks. Amelie and I are launching the rebrand on Friday. I want this done today." "I strongly advise against it," Samuel said, taking off his glasses. "Katerina was the CFO. She knows the numbers better than you. If she's walking away this easily, I want to know why." Konstantin slammed his hand on the table. "She's walking away because she's weak, Sam. Because she knows she can't run it without me. I built this company. I know what it's worth." He reached for the pen. "I'm not waiting for some accountant to tell me I'm rich. I know I'm rich." Samuel looked at him. He saw the ego. He saw the futility of arguing with a god complex. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper. "Then sign this first," Samuel said coldly. "It's a legal waiver. It states that I advised you to review the finances and you declined. If this goes wrong, you can't sue me for malpractice." Konstantin grinned. He signed it. Then he pulled the divorce agreement towards him. "Give me the pen," he said. He signed his name on the line that gave him the empire. He looked up at me, his eyes gleaming with triumph. "It's been a pleasure doing business with you," he said. I looked at the drying ink on the page. "The pleasure is all mine," I whispered. The final hearing was supposed to be a formality. For Konstantin it was a coronation. He entered courtroom 4B like he was boarding a yacht. He smoothed his tie, waved at Amelie who was waiting in the hallway with a bottle of champagne in her bag, and took his seat next to Samuel. He radiated the energy of a man who believed he'd just landed the deal of the century. I sat next to Nina. My hands were folded in my lap. I didn't look at Konstantin. I looked at the judge, a stern woman named Judge Edith Werns who had zero patience for theatrics. "Mr. Mercer," Judge Werns said, peering over her glasses, "you're requesting dissolution of the marriage and equitable distribution of assets as outlined in this agreement. You understand that by signing, You're assuming full ownership of Lux Design Group and the marital residence. Yes, Your Honor, Konstantin said. His voice projected to the back of the courtroom. He sounded like he was accepting an award. And you understand that with full ownership comes full responsibility for all encumbrances, liens, and liabilities attached to these entities? Konstantin waved his hand dismissively. Yes, I built the company. I know how it works. He didn't look at Samuel. He didn't look at the thick document in front of him. He just wanted the gavel to fall so he could start his new life. Very well, the judge said. Sign. The sound of his pen scratching across the paper was the loudest sound in the room. Scratch, scratch. It was the sound of a guillotine blade falling in slow motion. He signed. He signed the asset transfer. And then, with a flourish, he signed the liabilities disclosure list. He pushed the papers to the court clerk and leaned back, crossing his arms. He looked at me and grinned. Samuel, a careful lawyer, began organizing the signed copies to put in his briefcase. He picked up the liabilities list. His eyes scanned the top page casually, then stopped. He frowned. He turned the page. I watched the blood drain from his face. It started at his cheeks and traveled down to his neck until he looked like a wax figure. He leaned close to Konstantin. Konstantin, he whispered. But the courtroom was so quiet I heard every syllable. Did you read attachment C? I told you, Sam. I know the numbers. No, Samuel hissed. His hands started trembling. You don't. Look at line 14. Konstantin looked. He squinted. Notice of levy from the tax office. What is that? It means the company hasn't paid payroll taxes for 18 months, Samuel whispered. His voice rose in panic. It means there's an active criminal audit. So what? The company will pay it. No, Konstantin. You just signed a personal guarantee. You signed a waiver of corporate liability shield. Samuel pointed with a shaking finger to the bottom of the page. By assuming full ownership without an audit, you just took on personal liability for 2.3 million euros in debt. And because it's payroll fraud, this isn't just bankruptcy. Samuel looked at his client with horror. This is prison time. Konstantin froze. The grin fell from his face like wet clay. He looked at the paper, then he looked at me. You knew, he mouthed. I didn't smile. I didn't triumph. I just hero his gaze. Mr. Mercer, Judge Werns asked, holding the gavel. Is there a problem? Konstantin half stood. Wait. I didn't know. I need to withdraw. I didn't know anything about the taxes. Sit down, counselor. Judge Werns snapped at Samuel. Your client signed a waiver of due diligence 3 days ago against your advice. Have it here. He tested that he had full knowledge of the business operations. The court finds the agreement fair and binding. Bang. The gavel hit the wood. Divorce granted. Assets and liabilities transferred as signed. Proceeding concluded. The judge stood up and walked out. Konstantin collapsed into his chair. He looked like a man who'd just been told he had terminal cancer. He looked at the empire he'd fought so hard for, and for the first time in his life, he saw it as it really was. It wasn't a throne. It was a cage. I stood up, picked up my purse. I didn't say a word to him. There was nothing left to say. The ink was dry. I walked past him, past the pale, trembling lawyer, and out into the hallway. Amelie was there, holding the champagne, beaming. Did we win? She asked, reaching for my arm as I passed. Did he get anything? Stop. I looked at this girl, this ambitious, ruthless child who thought she'd stolen my life. Yes, I said quietly. He got everything. Every single cent. I walked to the elevator and pressed the down button. Behind me, the courtroom doors opened and the screaming began. The collapse of House Konstantin wasn't a slow erosion. It was a controlled demolition. The tax office didn't wait. 6 days after the hearing, agents arrived at the Lux Design Group offices. They didn't care about the rebrand or the minimalist aesthetic. They cared about 2 years of unpaid payroll taxes. They carried out computers and file folders, the same boxes Ingeborg had used to pack my shoes in front of the employees. The bank foreclosed on the Lake Starnberg estate 3 weeks later. The leverage Konstantin had used to buy his lifestyle became the weight that crushed him. Amelie lasted as long as the credit cards did. When the company Amex was declined at a spa in Baden-Baden, she didn't come home to support her husband. She ghosted. I heard she's already doing an internship at a startup in Berlin. She wasn't a partner. She was a seasonal trend. Ingeborg tried to call me once. I saw her number light up on my screen. Felt no anger. I felt no need to pick up and hear her beg or blame. I simply pressed block. That part of my life was a closed file. Konstantin is currently navigating bankruptcy court and a federal indictment. He lives in a studio apartment that has no conservatory. He has the empire exactly as he wanted it. It just happens to be an empire of ash. But I didn't stay to watch the fire burn. There's a philosophy I believe in now. The justice of the sower. Punitive justice is about punishment. It looks backwards, focuses on the pain of the past. But true justice, the kind that heals, is about creation. It focuses on what you plant in the ground that's been cleared. If I'd spent my energy just hating Konstantin, I'd still be bound to him. Instead, I took my settlement and part of my savings and founded the Haven Project. I rent a small, modest office in the city. It has good light and solid walls. We design dignified, beautiful, living spaces for women's shelters. We use trauma-informed design to create refugees for women who are rebuilding their lives from zero. Women who, like me, had to plan their exits in silence. Yesterday, Leonard stopped by the office after school. He sat at a drafting table, sketching on a notepad. He looked up at me and smiled. He's safe. His future is secure. The trust fund is intact. I looked at the blueprints on my desk. For 14 years, I was the invisible architect of a narcissist's ego. I propped up the walls of a house that was never meant to stand. Now I build for myself. I build for Leonard. And I build for the women who are still searching for the door. True power isn't loud. It doesn't need a press release or a helicopter. True power is the quiet certainty that you can survive the demolition and build a cathedral from the rubble. I'm Katerina. I'm the builder. If you believe that true power is silent and the best revenge is a life well lived, then hit the like button and share this story. See you in the next one.